And what we're seeing here with France and the UK leading the way, evading the facts, deliberately ignoring the nature of what is going on, endorsing evil and giving it exactly what it wants. And that's more important than any international aid and weapons. Israel has been doing that for 3+ decades through the peace process. So if you want to talk about what's happened, you could just say October 7th is the direct result of the two-state solution. You don't have a right to create a tyranny. And that's what the Palestinian movement has been doing. That's what the West has encouraged them to do. And that's what this recognition of Palestinian state is a further emboldening of.
Major countries like the United Kingdom, France, and Canada officially recognized the Palestinian state in the last few days. Today, in the Ayn Rand Institute's podcast, we aren't going to talk to you about international law. You don't need to be a legal scholar to understand that recognizing a state without defined borders, without a functional government, and without policy is a farce. We are going to talk, though, about justice. We are going to ask the question, what does it mean to have a legitimate state? Who deserves a state? And regarding last week's recognition of a Palestinian state, who is rewarded and who is punished for that? Elan, before I get to you for your first thoughts, I just want to tell you my experience while I was watching live as it happened, Keir Starmer's, UK's Prime Minister, announcing last weekend the recognition of a Palestinian state. And as his declaration was unfolded, I pictured in this cinematic way 3 windows with 3 of the protagonists, let's say, of this conflict. One with a Hamas official, one with, let's say, a young Palestinian who dreams of living a peaceful life, and a window with an Israeli who lost, let's say, beloved ones in October 7. And I was wondering, what does Starmer's announcement mean for each one of them? For the Hamas combatant, it's easy what this declaration means, what this recognition means. The message is, whatever you're doing, it's working. The blood you spilled, the countries you destroyed, it all comes down to this, and you are the victor. And 2 days ago, the Wall Street Journal's editorial put it in a very good way. It said, slaughtering Jews, holding hostages long enough, and using Gazans as human shields gets you your own state. And I picture this Hamas operative then turning to his subjects, to the people he terrorizes, and telling them, see, what I do is working, so now stop questioning us. Shut up and keep doing as we say. This is the person who is rewarded from this. And indeed, hours after Keir Starmer's announcement, we saw a video of Hamas lynching and executing, without a trial of course, some dissidents while a mob was cheering. These are the people who got a state. And what then about the Palestinian who wants to live a productive life in peace? Because supposedly all the solidarity in the West towards the Palestinian movement is addressed to such good people. So what does Starmer's and Macron's message mean to him? It means tough luck. It means that you, who wants to live a good life, you will live your life under an authoritarian dictatorship. Now officially, with an official stamp, that this is now your government. This is your fate. Your fate is war and destruction. And Elan, last but not least, what about the grieving Israeli, the Israeli who experienced the horror of October 7 or maybe who lost someone? Well, Macron and Starmer, they gave to that Israeli the message, I don't care about you. I don't care about your pain. I don't care that you will live side by side with a state that has as its official founding myth your death and destruction. It's telling Israelis, you experienced one October 7th, you'll probably experience more in the coming years, but I don't care. At best, thoughts and prayers. And I wonder, Elan, is this the outcome Macron and Starmer wanted? I mean, it can't be, but it is. And this is why I think that the last days will live in infamy. We will remember them as a very dark moment for the West. And I hope, Elan, that I'm not too dramatic here, or actually I hope I'm too dramatic and I hope I'm wrong. But I think that this was an absolute disgusting moment for the West. But what do you think?
You might be understating the problem, if anything. I think this is a really, really horrific step towards not only rewarding Hamas, as you've been pointing out, and betraying the better people, however many of them remain among the Palestinians, because I do think those people will suffer under whatever follows Hamas as an authoritarian dictatorial regime there, and the Palestinian Authority, which is a government, quasi-government in the West Bank territories. It is nobody's idea of a good society. I think it's a dictatorial regime. It has been for decades. So in that respect, I think it's true that it's rewarding evil. I think it's also right to think of this as, and more directly, a punishment of the good. I think this is, and if you listen to Starmer and Macron, what they're talking about is, Israel, you've gone too far. This war isn't going anywhere. You're not achieving anything. You need to stop. And that's why we're giving this endorsement of a Palestinian, recognition of a Palestinian state. It is a punishment for Israel's actions insofar as it's pursuing its self-defense, its self-interest. So it's punishing Israel for doing things that support its own security. Now, many people criticize Israel right now for doing too much in support of its self-defense. And I think that's the wrong criticism. My view is it hasn't been sufficiently concerned with its self-interest, with its self-defense. And I think it's been fighting in a way that is hamstrung. And I think it could have finished this war many, many months ago, if not within weeks of October 7th. So in one respect, it is rewarding Hamas and all the people who will follow. But the part of this that needs extra emphasis is that this is punishing the good. It's punishing those who are the innocent victims of Hamas, both within the Palestinian territories, insofar as there remain people like that, and in Israel. And I think it is that. And I think the other party, which you mentioned, the solidarity in the West towards the Palestinians, I have a different view of that. I don't think most of that solidarity is really towards people in the Palestinian communities who are seeking a better life. I don't think there's any kind of thought about who the Palestinians really are. If there were, there'd be less solidarity because there aren't that many people like that. I think this is, from the position of Macron and Starmer, this is an appeasement, not only of Hamas and the Palestinian movement generally, it's an appeasement of nihilists in the UK and in France. Those are the people who went into the streets by the tens and hundreds of thousands over months after October 7th. And you and I were talking about this at the time with our colleague Ankur Gate. Those massive demonstrations, and those demonstrations were not against Hamas and the atrocities it committed. They were demonstrations against Israel for being the victim. What those people were seeking, many of them, was the tearing down of a basically free society in the name of seeing Hamas succeed. That is destruction. That's the desire to burn everything down and destroy the good. And that is what this recognition reinforces. So in my view, this is really horrific, and it should live on in infamy. And especially, and this deserves emphasis too, this isn't just some obscure island nation that's a part of the UN saying, oh, we're going to recognize the Palestinian state, which has been happening for years. Like there's 150 plus countries or so, I lost count now, who've said, yes, we recognize the Palestinian. And in some sense, it's a joke at that point. But when two permanent members of the UN Security Council, if you even have respect for it anymore, but there's reason to think of it as having influence and power, the UK and France are still permanent members of the Security Council. Is the most powerful part of the UN, which is a horrific organization. Their doing this carries so much more weight and significance. So in that sense, this is strong, basically free countries endorsing a movement that is out to destroy freedom and individualism. And that's on a grand scale. You can't get worse than that.
And actually, it's if you pay attention to the actual announcements, I will mention again Starmer, but all of them are almost similar. It's like the same person has written them. What I find preposterous is the denial of reality in which they are engaging. So Starmers begin by saying all supposedly the right things, that something horrible happened in October 7, that the hostages are still there, and that Hamas is a group with which one cannot negotiate. And then somehow there is this blank, and then there's this logical leap that somehow we will discourage Hamas by being what it is if we give a recognition to the Palestinian state. And the question is, how? You're giving Hamas, you're granting it a great victory, and you claim that this somehow will discourage Hamas. And this is denying reality. What these people are doing is they are denying what Hamas, but also, as you said back in the day, the PLO, the Palestinian Authority, what they are about. So Macron and Starmer are wishing that the Palestinian movement were something else from what it actually is. But, to quote Ayn Rand, wishing won't make it so. And when you deny reality, reality strikes back. And actually, Elan, I was thinking, it's not only the Westerners that tried to persuade themselves that Hamas is not what it is. The more I study what some prominent experts in Israel are saying, why did October 7 happen? Why were we caught asleep? And the answer is that because many people in high places in Israel did not want to believe that Hamas is dangerous. They said, okay, now they have money, they have their expensive hotels in Qatar, just let them be. They don't really mean it. And this is exactly what the West still is saying, that, yeah, they say they want to destroy Israel, but they can't really mean it. That's the one denial of reality. The other denial of reality is that, of course, we don't say that it should be a state under Hamas, but we know that there's a reason why in the West Bank there haven't been elections in I don't know how many years. It is because if there were elections, Hamas would win. And the Westerners, the Western leaders, want to close their eyes and think that if they close their eyes, this is not going to happen. So some serious denial of reality going on here, Elan. And this is never good.
Yeah, I think that's right. There's a willful ignoring of facts and a whitewashing of what's actually happening. So this, if you read the French, they had a summit with a number of countries right before the UN General Assembly meetings. And if you read it, it's a tedious list of everything that needs to happen. Hamas has to be removed. It has to be demilitarized. And but it's detail after detail. It's just ignoring the big picture, which is that there is no political party or person in the Palestinian movement, whether on the Hamas side or the PLO side, the PA, Palestinian Authority, who actually wants to live in peace and wants to build a society where individuals are free to prosper and build and think and do and create and trade. They're not interested in that, and they've shown that for decades. And in the early 90s, when the peace process, the path to a two-state solution was being launched, many people lied to themselves and willfully ignored the facts at the time. There's much less to say for those people now. It's much less excusable. There's nothing to mitigate the ignoring of those facts. In some sense, it's so much worse today because there's evidence upon years and years of indoctrination and attacks and just the bloody murders that we've seen for so long. Pushing all that aside, I think one thing to recognize here is that this is, I think, blatantly dishonest. Now, there are people who don't know that much about this conflict, and I'm not calling them dishonest. Ignorance is not the same thing as lying to yourself or defying the facts of reality. But if you're the head of state of the UK or the head of state of France, and you have people who know this stuff and they can tell you if you don't know yourself, and you are ignoring it and willfully ignoring it, that is textbook dishonesty. And what's the motivation for this dishonesty? Like what is driving it? And I think this goes to a point that we should revisit. Earlier, I said this is a punishment of the good and a rewarding of evil, and it's giving evil a kind of endorsement that it needs. I think where this comes from is it's a manifestation of this idea that Ayn Rand called altruism. And it's not about benevolence or being nice to people. It's a philosophical position that tells you the good is to sacrifice. Now, if that's your premise, if that's your standard, there's many things you can't admit to yourself. So you can't admit you cannot tell yourself, well, I'm supposed to sacrifice for the Palestinians and they have to have a state and we have to give them international aid and they need all of this handouts. But what are they actually like? And what are their political goals? And what do they do to their own people? How do they lynch people? How do they persecute them? The complete absence of a real society that protects human life. You can't admit that to yourself if your standard is, well, no, they're needy, they're underdogs, we have to serve them. So there's a way in which the more you are on that premise of altruism, the more it leads you to lie to yourself because you can't admit the facts. Because if you admitted them, you would have to question the standard. You're telling me I have to give a state to those who don't deserve it because they don't deserve it, because they've proven for decades that what they want to do with the power of a state is crush the rights of their own people and then murder their neighbors? Well, no, that can't be true. Let's not admit that. So this is part of what happens to people's thinking. This is your brain on altruism. It's destructive. It corrupts your thinking. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is thinking more about what is going on with this endorsement of evil, endorsement of a movement that's destructive of human life and freedom. And I think that you mentioned the Wall Street Journal op-ed or editorial criticizing this recognition of the Palestinians. I think that it's useful to criticize it as they have done, and you quoted them. The bigger point, which is often missed, and I think this is a lesson from Ayn Rand's book, Atlas Shrugged, and many of her nonfiction writings, is that her analysis of evil is that it's real, but it's impotent. It has no power of its own. It succeeds to the extent that the good, people who are rational and productive and thoughtful, it's to the extent that they default on opposing it in favor of positive ideals. And what we're seeing here with France and the UK leading the way, and many, many other nations, and who knows, perhaps the US will be in this camp before long, evading the facts, deliberately ignoring the nature of what is going on, endorsing evil and giving it exactly what it wants. And that's more important than any international aid and weapons. And it's what people don't realize, and what Ayn Rand is really eloquent in showing, is that evil, more than the money that it gets, it's the moral respectability, the endorsement of the good that it needs. And it craves that. Because absent that, it can't achieve what it wants. It needs that deception. It needs people to think of it as better than itself, than it is, and to cover its nature and pass itself off as civilized, as normal, as deserving of respect. And this is another way in which one's thinking is corrupted by this moral idea of sacrifice, because it tells you can't admit the facts, because that'll break the whole chain of things you've wished weren't true, and you have to serve those who are undeserving, and because they're undeserving. And what does that do to those who deserve your support? Well, you abandon them. So within the Palestinian communities and within Israel especially, and including in their own countries, the people who don't want to see these nihilists in the street. So it's a complete inversion of justice and of facts. And I think those go together, and it's mutually reinforcing in a vicious circle.
And to concretize what you said, Elan, what recognizing a Palestinian state which will continue being hostile to Israel is, it says to the Israelis, look, you've built all this wealth, you have a free society, and you are the startup nation, you created all these miracles, and this is why you can take it. So if another October 7 happens, it's not the end of the world. You can take it. You have this system where you can defend against missiles. You have the Iron Dome. You're gonna figure it out. So this is a huge injustice, right? So all this is not theoretical. It has very real effect to very real people. Or again, what does it say to whoever in Palestine wants to live in peace? It tells them you are to live under Hamas. So it literally punishes the good people in a very direct way. It doesn't even need too much abstraction to see what the end point will be. And I want also to bring Elan a story from the past in terms of what does it mean to recognize a state which does not deserve recognition. And because, when we don't get the lessons of history, history repeats itself in all that stuff. So what happened in the 1930s when the United States decided that it is time to do a symbolic gesture of friendship and recognize Soviet Union, recognize the Bolshevik regime? Now, interestingly, Roosevelt, who was the then president, he said, I think all this animosity is a misunderstanding. There is no reason we cannot be friends. And that's why not only he recognized Soviet Union, but he wrote off some of their debt from the Tsarist era as a gesture of friendship, that we have nothing we are all friends here. And in exchange, Stalin promised not to interfere in US political affairs. And for the love of God, the Americans believed him. So they said, look, he said it. He said now they're going to be okay. It's in the same way as the Palestinians says, yeah, maybe we will stop the pay for slay program, which is giving money to people who commit terrorist acts. Now, how did the Soviet Union honor its word? Only a few days later, after the official recognition, the foreign minister of Soviet Union met with some US high-ranking communists and told them, don't worry. What we promised is just a piece of paper. You can continue your subversive activity. And also see what was the very real consequences of the United States recognizing Soviet Union. Now the US Communist Party could work in an open way, in an easier way, that we represent a country with which we have relations. And it attracted more people in the ranks of the party. It legitimized the supporters of the party being higher in the public sector. And this set the stage for the spy operations of the 30s and the 40s that led, among other horrible things, to the Soviets getting the nuclear bomb. So there's a lesson here, Elan. It is disastrous to turn a blind eye to the true nature of who you're dealing with. Roosevelt tried to pretend that the Bolsheviks were not who they said they were. And the world paid a huge price for this. It's still paying this today. And I'm afraid that also the world is doing the same with Hamas today. And I'm afraid we're going to pay for it. But Nikos, I don't want to end in such a low note. So have you got anything to add?
Yeah, I have quite a few things to say, and I'll just try to be brief. Some of this I talk about in my book, What Justice Demands, but just to emphasize your analogy.
By the way,
just to emphasize your analogy to the recognition of the Soviet Union, that is a very strong analogy, and it's important to draw the lessons from that, because it's exactly the same case where an evil regime based on evil ideas was seeking the endorsement of the free societies, the good societies, precisely because it needed that. It could not operate, it could not fool its own people, it could not pretend to itself that it's doing something good, absent that moral endorsement or sanction. And that is what America did in other countries as well during the Cold War in particular. And even before that, that is what Ayn Rand calls the sanction of the victim. Is you're empowering your own destroyers. Israel has been doing that for 3+ decades through the peace process. So if you want to talk about what will happen in the future, you don't need to think very far into the future. You could just say October 7th is the direct result of the two-state solution. It's the attempt to implement the two-state solution. And you just need to then wind the clock forward and say, well, if you think recognizing Palestinian state is a good thing, what will that do to the Palestinian movement? It tells them, yes, you don't have the weapons to fight in Gaza anymore. You're maybe on your last legs, and now it's a guerrilla war. And maybe the Palestinian Authority is losing money, but it means your goal of destroying freedom, of a free society, your destruction of people's lives, the oppression, the tyranny that you've imposed on people, that's all good with us. You should keep going. We don't have a problem with it. Keep going. That's basically what you're telling them about their goal. And that's, as I was trying to mention earlier, that's even more powerful than sending them money and weapons, which the West has been doing by the billions for a long time. And people overlook the fact that even if you stop all the money, so long as you tell the Palestinian movement, yes, you are entitled to a state if what you're trying to do is build a tyranny or a religious dictatorship, which is what has been told for decades. You're telling them to keep fighting, keep murdering, and keep slaughtering people in their beds. So that's the path forward. That's what's being done here. It's saying to the Palestinians, October 7th, yes, press repeat. Let's see more of that, because you're entitled to kill people. And one small point, you started the conversation by saying we're not going to talk about international law. And I certainly don't want to get into that topic, because I don't think it's the most important topic. The most important topic is what we've been unpacking here, which is the moral issue, the injustice of this. There is an aspect of thinking about the standard for when do people have a right to a state. And I think that's primarily a philosophic moral issue, not international law. And I know it's a complicated one, but here I would say nobody, and this is echoing Ayn Rand's analysis of this based on her advocacy of individual rights as an unbreakable principle. Nobody has a right to a state if what they're trying to do is destroy freedom. You don't have a right to create a tyranny. And that's what the Palestinian movement has been doing. That's what the West has encouraged them to do. And that's what this recognition of Palestinian state is a further emboldening of. And the final thought here about the endorsement of Palestinian state, as you pointed out very insightfully at the beginning, this doesn't have borders. It doesn't have reality, this Palestinian state. It's just this sort of a fiction. The deeper way to look at this is, if the Palestinian movement, despite decades of slaughter, murder, and tyranny that it's inflicted on everyone around it and within its domain, if they're entitled to a state, who isn't entitled to a state? Why not the Taliban? Why not Islamic State? Why not any fanatic? Why not Iran? Why is Iran the problem? And that trivializes the huge moral, philosophical achievement of creating free societies, which is not the norm throughout history. History is littered with people suffering under various kinds of tyranny, and freedom is it's an innovation in political thought. And what this statement does, the French and British and the other countries behind them endorsing a Palestinian state, is saying there is no standard for when you have a state. If people wish it, we're going to give it to them. And especially if they're weak and suffering and underdogs, that's what entitles them to it. If they don't deserve it, that's why they should get one. And again, this is an aspect of the injustice here, because it means that, well, there's nothing special about America or the UK or France insofar as they're virtuous, which is that they protect freedom. You're corrupting the ideal of freedom by including the Palestinian movement in it and saying they are entitled to a state. To me, that should affront everybody. Everyone who lives in a free society should be up in arms about this, because what you're saying is there's nothing valuable about the kind of society that we've built.
And that's the main problem with the cesspool that is the United Nations. It says that whoever you are, North Korea, Iran, theocracy, you throw gays from the roof, you terrorize women, we're all the same here. We're all states. We're all a brotherhood. And this is, it's again, who are the main victims of this? Good countries and the poor people who want to live a good life in these societies. But for the end, Elan, you mentioned the underdog principle, and you mentioned that there has been some history where we have seen how the Palestinian movement deals with areas that is controlled. So I want to tell people that I gained a lot of knowledge on these issues from this book of yours, What Justice Demands. And we said today's topic is about justice. So I want to recommend once more this book that I keep returning to it. Any parting words?
No, I would encourage people to, if they're interested in the moral philosophical issue here, which I think is the cardinal issue to look at, this is another reason to look deeper into Ayn Rand's philosophy, because it is an incredibly powerful tool for understanding everything around us in your own life and the culture we live in, and including especially the more complicated the issue, the more it can help you understand it. And I would say this is more reason to read Atlas Shrugged, because the one of the lessons in that, as I was indicating earlier, is this profound analysis of the nature of good and evil and how to navigate life in the face of what is actually evil, and what does that mean for you, both in your personal life and in a culture.
Thank you, Elan. Many thanks to our viewers for their time. All the best.